That was the point.
Somewhat closing.
Yeah, we follow them. You can move to balance it out to get secure if you want.
Yeah.
Correct.
Alright. Hi guys, welcome to Rockfield Banker 2018. My name is Huda of your chat. On the motion about being an African American politician, I got my
Panel, this debate is not about some arbitrary caucus or any arbitrary nature politician. This is about a single African-American politician and what he fights for and why we're willing to fight for his cause in the long term, right? This is why redistributive justice is so harmful for any of the progression in terms of what it's willing to fight for, in terms of improving their lives. How does this debate operate in terms of redistributive justice and what does it look like, right? In terms of it operates in terms of quotas and how we prioritize minorities, whether it be in employment, education, or in other ways where we give these minority communities a leg up in life, right? How do we achieve this redistributive justice and how we see it in opposition's world, right? Or how it's going to operate in opposition's world, right? The comparative being where outside we fight for democratic ideals by using a single African American, right? Where we see it's much harder for him to fight in your world, where the cards are stacked against him. Because with their world, we see when you have redistributive justice, this African American politician can be demonized by the wider community, by the white community. No, thank you, right? Therefore, when you're fine with these non-conventional protests and all this violence, you necessarily make this guy the scapegoat by the white community. This is something we regret in the long term. No, thank you. This leads me nicely on to our two issues in this debate, right? Firstly, no, thank you. Why it's better for this African-American politician and why we should do everything in our power to defend him and the causes he fights for. Secondly, why working twice as hard is better, even if the net outcomes are the same, right? Because this debate, no, thank you. This debate operates in this circumstance, right? So why is this better for this African-American politician? So what is the interest or what is the psyche of this politician in terms of what he wants to achieve in the long term? So he needs to maintain his current political agenda or his current political voting base in order to achieve anything long term. Why is this so important? Because his stance can be about injustice, but it should be about this idea about working twice as hard, because redistributive justice is a topic that is so toxic in the community that the wider community is less likely to engage with him. When you're less likely to engage with him, you're less likely to have this African-American politicians up there in, for example, the Senate or in the House, going for these policies that will actually lead to better outcomes for these communities that they're fighting for in the first place, right? So why should, on our side, are we okay with him fighting for the noble cause instead of redistributive justice? But before that, yes.
So wait, clarification. You want redistributive justice or quotas and so on and so forth, but working twice as hard means getting into them.
We characterize what happens in your world. In your world, there are quotas, there's violence, there's protests. In our world, we're fighting for the narrative of working twice as hard. In their world, you're less, with all the systems of quotas and everything, you're less likely to reach the outcomes you deserve when the white community, for example, are villainized. This is why on our side, we would prioritize working twice as hard and therefore something we would go for. But why are we willing to have this and why are we willing to buy the bullet in terms of working twice as hard, right? Because when you appeal to a larger voting base, especially the white communities, for example, in America, they don't want to be villainized. Because if you're villainized, you're less likely to work with them because you don't see them as your allies, you see them as your enemies, right? So we tell you that this politician will voice out these concerns about injustice. But the focus would be about working twice hard instead of diverting his resources and his political capital away from that. His political capital is the most crucial part of this debate because his political capital is limited in the fact that he's only a single politician. Therefore, he needs to pick his battles carefully. He cannot avoid to lose it all by labeling his potential voting base and potentially the people that are going to work with him in the House or in the Senate, for example, his supposed allies by labeling them as villains. This is why redistributive justice, with all the violence and the protest, is something that we don't support, right? So even if, right, we concede they lose out some of the African American voting base, in terms of scale, right, no thank you, we would say that they garner more appeal from a larger voting base. In terms of numbers, right, when you get larger voting base, what is the benefit of this? You have the potential to have an ascendancy to a higher office, right? So when you have a higher office, you're more likely to be able to dictate the outcomes in the future. No, thank you, right? When you're able to dictate the outcomes, at least you have a dialogue which has the possibility to reach, for example, all the benefits they will like to achieve on position as well. But more importantly, I'll take it in a moment, when you have this more widespread message that is spread around among the African American community, because a single African American politician achieves his success, therefore it becomes the face of the community. This is something that will bridge the gap between those, for example, the white community and the African American community in terms of bridging this gap in terms of inequalities or injustices. Yes.
Would you condemn or at least disassociate African Americans who don't meet your twice as hard standard?
Yeah.
In our side, we believe that we should fight for it. African Americans should prioritize it. On our side, it's very simple. African Americans should prioritize this. We say they should not opt for your system of redistributive justice. This is the comparative we're working in, right? So when you have this message being more widespread, you bridge the gap between, for example, the white communities and the African American communities, and you're more likely to reach successful dialogues in terms of achieving your comparative aims. What is the comparative on both our sides, right? When you fight the white voter base on your side of the house, you sacrifice the actor. You make him the scapegoat, and you're less likely to have future actors in the long run, right? Because the white community has reasonable justification to say these are people that are not willing to engage with us, and when you're not willing to engage with us, your message doesn't spread. But why is this message comparatively better, right? Both sides must accept that redistributive justice is bad. Why? Because structurally in the status quo, laws are there that create this arbitrary barriers as well. You have gerrymandering, right? And you have the white judges just arbitrarily deciding on the lives of African American communities, and disproportionately in for example, courts, even though, for example, it's like a 90% white judges, when African American communities in certain areas, for example, 50 or 60%. These are the arbitrary barriers that are set up. But secondly, more importantly, the system is inherently against them, right? So you have the authorities against them. And even further, it's just a single actor in this debate. Why does a single actor mean that you cannot necessarily fight all the authorities and everything here? Means that you have to appease to what needs the white community needs in order to be able to engage with them, right? When you have a single actor, you must be willing to engage. When you pick the hard fight and you don't achieve anything at all, it becomes a comparative. Where on our side, we have marginal benefits, versus your side, we have no benefits and antagonism, and less likely to reach any future outcome in the long run, right? So the comparative is twice as hard is better because two reasons. Compliance towards a system that is comparatively better, and even if we have no benefits or little benefits on our side of the house, at least there's a possibility of achieving long-run benefits in terms of being able to engage with the white community. Something doesn't happen when you villainize them continuously.
Yeah.
Okay.
We think in our world, change can also happen when you demand the retributive and the distributive justice towards black people. We think we don't have to tell the black people to work twice as harder because it's an unnecessary and unfair burden for you to push onto these people, right? So in today's speech, I have two main arguments, right? First, I'll talk about what does twice as good mean, and secondly, I'll also tell you about what corrective justice do we demand from these as an African American politician, right? But before that, a few rebuttals that don't fit into my argumentation. Firstly, side opening government tries to tell you that you're a single actor and you can't necessarily fight the fight because you're a single actor, right? We tell you that you as an African American politician already puts you in a position of influence, you have followers, you lead the people will follow you. Hence, we think that in our world, the engagement will happen better, more critically, and changes can be made better rather than you just applying and pleasing to what the white community demands, right? And secondly, they also tell you that the system is inherently already against them. We tell you that in our world, it's not just about the redistributive justice that you want to demand. We think it's not just about all these quotas, right? We think it's also about retributive and you calling out those people who did wrong to you, and you calling out these people, why do you have to work twice as hard when they actually wronged you in the first place? Sit down. Moving on to my first argument, right? What does twice as good mean? First level, we think that twice as good means that you're not just being better than your previous self, but it also means that you have to beat everyone else who are born with privilege and already positioned better than you are, and have a higher position than you are because of that privilege, right? We think that being better than your previous self is not enough. We think this puts you in a position that you tell these people that you being better than your previous self is not enough, and you being the best version of yourself is still not enough, right? What does this mean, right? We think that when you tell a black person that you have to work twice as hard, when you tell a black person who lives in the ghettos, who is hopeful towards your own representation, we think that you make these people feel like they don't have. You feed into the narrative. You feed them into the system of that already disadvantages you in the first place. Sit down. We think that this puts a huge and unfair burden onto these black people just for the sake of them getting on the same pedestal as everyone else. We think this is totally unfair, right? But second level, right? We think when you tell them to work twice as hard, you tell them that your lack of doing this has fed into your deprivation. This means that you change the blame of your deprivation in history. It means that you're blaming the blacks for what is happening to them. We think that you now blame these people for all the deprivation that has been imposed onto you. We think that what's important here is that you need to recognize that the blacks already have the ability to change their fate, but it's not always because of them that they're in that state, right? We think that we would actually rather tell this black community that as an African American, we have to demand all the corrective justice and that the justice that society can offer to you. Third level of analysis, right? We think, but before I move on to my second argument, what does it mean to be an African American politician? Sit down, right? We think when you are put in that position, you are now at a stage that is packaged with influence. You now have the bigger degree of influence. You get to engage with political figures who can actually create change for you. Now you can actually demand for better corrective justice, right? We think that this degree of influence gives you the ability to actually talk to people. Gives you the ability to actually engage with these people because you already have followers, right? We think that when you are as an African American, doesn't matter if you're there are two situations to this, right? You being a privileged African American politician or you not being a privileged. If you are from a not privileged African American politician who has rose up to this position, we think that if you are poor and you rose up to this position, it's already inspirational enough for those people to actually follow and be hopeful to you, right? We think that it's possible for them to actually help create change for other people on the ground. We think that because you work twice as hard to be in this position, you can now help to actually put the disadvantaged people at a better position. It's unfair for you to impose the same burden onto the whole black community, right? But secondly, even if you come from a more privileged African American and you rose up to this position, right? We think it's totally unfair if you want to tell these people, hey, you got to work twice as hard when you were born actually privileged and now you are a politician and you can actually help to represent these people, right? But before a second argument opening.
So when you have 15 white senators against one African American senator, where does your influence come from?
As long as you're in that place, we think that you have the followers and you can already create change because the black community make up a certain amount of people that can create change, right? But secondly, what kind of corrective justice do we want to demand, right? We think that what does it look like in our world? We think it looks like you calling out for the people in the police academy that has did wrong towards the civilians. We think you calling out the police who actually shot Eric Garner for his death, right? We think it also looks like you calling out those teachers and lecturers from educational institutions that won't actually help to that are discriminatory in nature and won't actually help these black people, these black students to advance in the society. Right? We think that when we do this, you pull them out. We call them out for their actions. You put them a push up. We we prove a form of push towards these people, and we tell them that we demand corrective justice because you have wronged these black people as so, right? But second of all, what are the broader impacts that come with this corrective justice? We think that when you tell them to work twice as harder, it's not just them working twice as harder in terms of work ratio, right? We think it also means you telling them that you must rise above the hate. You think that you tell them you have to behave a certain behavior, you have to work twice as harder, you have to be more kinder, and you can't behave a certain way because you should be fearing of the repercussions, right? We think this kind of narrative are harmful towards the black community, right? We think as an African American politician, it's unfair for you to actually tell the people who are already oppressed in the first place to behave a certain way. We think that nothing will be fixed if he keeps on fermenting into this idea, and no kind of change will happen, right? We think that currently the system tells you that you have to behave a certain way or you have to work twice as harder, but you also have to remember that but as an African American politician, you also have to remind these black people what do these white community owe to you, what kinds of wrong have they done to you in previous events. Right? So what have we told you today? Right? We told you that in our work, why working twice as harder is only harmful towards the black community and it won't create any change. And secondly, we've also told you that why in our work, when we have this corrective justice and also you calling out these individuals who have wronged you in the first place, will give a form of push in order for you to actually demand more justice given towards the black community. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
Leader of Opposition, I'm the Deputy Prime Minister. Stay there.
So, opening opposition missed this debate because for the entire 7 minutes of the LO's speech, none of it was spent on telling me why the actor comes out in a beneficial outcome in this debate. The debate takes place in the perspective of this actor. And that's why the Prime Minister, we told you, with limited influence, limited voter base, limited appeal, they aren't going anywhere with this individual. Not only do they have to justify his actions, they have to justify him throwing away his career, they have to justify him taking the more unpopular stance and making himself the battering ram, and why he would be the person who would want to do that. And I think the leader of opposition went even further. She went to tell us we need to call out the shooter of Eric Garner. You need to call out racism, not just talk about the injustice and emphasize structural correction. You need to call out the flaws in the system, really villainize this community, because apparently that's going to get you a position in a higher office. That is why the debate does not happen. He's likely to throw away his career. If he's not voted out, he'll be blocked out in the House of Representatives. He'll be blocked out in being able to pass positive legislation. Where is there room for change in opening opposition? There is no room for change in opening opposition. I'll answer 3 questions in this speech. Firstly, under which circumstance is it better for the politician? I'm just going to add layers analysis to the unresponded layers of analysis in Joshua's speech. Secondly, let's talk about what does working hard really mean? Because I thought it was slightly strawman by leader of opposition. And thirdly, why compliance is better than resistance. Sure.
So if the opening government's position is that this is a single African-American politician and every other African-American politician does the exact opposite, how are you going to fit within the political scene? How does your world work?
So under our circumstance, you ride the white wave, right? The wave that white people support. That's why you win the white majority and white politicians back you up. That's why when you do get to power, you are also protecting yourself and in a way telling African-Americans to work twice as hard. Maybe other African-American politicians don't support you. They will lose out. And even if that's true, in your world, they will lose out with you. But let's move on to closing opposition slightly, right? They said we would have to condemn people who don't conform to working twice as hard. Similarly, in your world, you would condemn people on the other side, right? People, wait, what's your stance again? Your stance is you guys want to fight injustice. Anybody who works twice as hard in your world, who says they want to be a part of the system, you would have to condemn them as well. We say it's worth it because towards the end, when he does become the figurehead of the movement and he tells people it is worth the concession, that is when it becomes beneficial. Yeah, slight confusion there. First question, why is it better for the person? And this is where we make the delineation, because it's not the same. Just because he's one actor, it doesn't mean the outcomes are the same on both houses. From the perspective of our actor, he needs to maintain his job. He needs to be voted in. He needs to, if he wants to pass laws, he needs to have a majority in being able to do that. And under which circumstances that happen? We say one, I think a reasonable amount of African American voters would still support him. Maybe it's for identity. Maybe they also believe in working twice as hard. Maybe they also believe that injustice is true, but secondary to what we do after injustice. But even if some people drop out, we are also filling that space in with white voters, white senators, people who will back him up in his opinion. And this is why Joshua tells you it is the most important part of this debate, because you can't throw away the politician. Why would he work that hard to throw all his career away for a resistance that might not necessarily materialize? In our world, he gets a greater reach. And this is why there is a difference. The influence in our world, so they haven't won the debate on whether the message is better, right? Which message is better? But what is true is that our message reaches a greater amount of people. In your world, he puts up a front, puts up a resistance, possibly is voted out, loses influence anyway, doesn't get as much media airtime, have a seat. And because of all of these things, your attempt to tell people to fight the system is also weaker. In our world, he rides that wave. He gets a bigger office. He gets more airtime because he is the figurehead of that movement. He can tell more people to fight, to work twice as hard, more people to assimilate themselves within the system. So as for this person, conclusively in opening government, he retains his job, probably gets a promotion, and gets to fight for what he wants to fight in a most effective manner. And this is why we are the first team and the only team so far to protect the actor in this debate. But let's move past the actor to the secondary debate. Yeah, sure.
Your case is only correct if all white politicians are homogenous and will not work with outspoken black politicians.
Okay, so maybe there's a scale of people, but if discrimination exists, you have to accept that the people that also do not emphasize injustice from white Caucasian politicians is more, right? So because of that, on a scale, we do get more political leverage on our side, because there might be white politicians that are willing to engage with injustice, but it's certainly less than white politicians that won't engage with injustice or acknowledge injustice but don't think it's important. And that's what we fight for. Second question, what does her working hard really mean? Because Elo tells us that it leads to people feeling insufficient and feeling hopeless, because you work as hard as possible, you still don't get that promotion, you still don't get to go to school, you don't get that job. I'll tell you why it's better. Because at the worst case in opening government, it's zero sum. You work as hard as possible, but you still don't get the benefits you deserve to work as hard for. And that's why we think it's still better than opposition. Because in your work, you try to fight. You try to fight the police, you get arrested. You try to fight the system, you lose your job. You try to fight for a better future, and due to your limited capital, limited clout, and I'll assume other people do it with you as well, which they have no claim to, by the way. In the end, more and more people are fighting a lost cause, which they will lose out in. Which means our worst case is nothing. People just stay in their own systems, and they still don't go up the social ladder. In comparison to your worst case, where they go significantly lower, they find themselves in incarceration because they chose to resist arrest. They chose to fight against the system, and that's why we think compliance is still better at its worst. But at its best, and they can't take this away from us, some people who comply do make it better at the end of the day. Try to not fight resistance, try to not resist arrest, trying to work your way through white schools, through white law, court cases. Some people do have success stories, and it's much more than opposition. But for the people that don't, right? And this is where even at its worst, we think it's better. In your world, people will feel hopeless. You know why people will feel hopeless? They know that injustice is real. They know that it's true, but they also know they can't do anything about it. In our world, they will know that it's true, but when politicians tell them working twice as hard gets you that job, we have a certain amount of hope that the African Americans in opposition do not have. Because in our world, they will work. They will continue to work and tell themselves that there's a positive outcome. And throughout their duration, we keep positivity up in these communities. We give them a reason to fight, we give them a reason to study, we give them a reason to integrate themselves in the community. In your world, if you fail, you cause even more hopelessness, even more feelings of insufficiency, because communities know they can't do anything about it. We choose to say that there is a problem, but we can work our way around it. And we'll tell African Americans that we can work our way around it. Regardless of whether it happens throughout their journey, morale is higher in our side, and the outcomes are also better, because you can choose to avoid negative outcomes. That is way more prominent in opposition.
Right. This side, but definitely.